Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Adi Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. All right, and today's guest is Mike Krass. Hi, Mike.
Hello, how are you?
Good. It's great to have you on the podcast. We're going to have a great conversation today. But first of all, let me introduce you. So, Mike, you're the owner and the founder of MKG Marketing, which is the world's premier marketing agency for cybersecurity vendors. And you focus on SEO, digital ads, analytics, but for the cybersecurity area. And you now have your business for about 11 years, right? And you grew the business and you scaled it using a lot of systems, but you embrace the people first philosophy. And you promote a strong work-life integration while you hold your employees and your clients, which is very important, employees and clients accountable, right? So if you do that, that's how you can scale. And, I think something really interesting is that you're also a pilot, right?
That's true, yeah.
Yeah, so you have a little plane that you enjoy flying around.
Yeah, single engine aircraft and, talking about systems, the world of aviation is filled with systems and checklists. That's pretty much what we run on a daily basis is systems and checklists.
Absolutely. So, when you're flying a plane, you have to follow the system. You can't just say, oh, no, we don't need a system for that, or we don't need a system for that. That's not going to work, right? But before we started the podcast, we were talking, and a good topic, and that's what we're going to discuss today, is that I'm sure many of our listeners are going to identify with that, is when do you actually need a system and when do you not? And is there, another question I'm going to pose is it really true that you really don't have a system, or do you have a system, you just don't document it or make it standard, right? So we'll talk about, the needs of systems and what is too much, what is too little. And I would love to hear your perspective from a marketing agency, right? So it's more creative, which doesn't necessarily always goes towards system as opposed to, let's say, flying, right? Where you need, as you said, like the checklist and the systems. Correct. How does it all integrate together? But first, let's talk about your agency and the systems that you developed in order to be able to scale. So tell me, give me and the listeners a little bit of the background on how you were able to grow your business using systems.
Absolutely. So like you said earlier, our agency is called MKG Marketing, and we serve cybersecurity businesses to help them with their digital marketing. And what we've learned over the past, say, 11 years or so is that early in the company's lifespan, there were no systems. It was all tribal knowledge. It was all in your head because there was only 3 or 4 or 5 of us. And if I remember correctly, once we really crossed the 5 or 6 person mark in terms of total team members, that started to provide some issues. The first issue was you had quality control, not from the sense of one person was better than the other, from the sense of one person produces something different than the other. So if a customer is used to receiving, a campaign or some copy or something else, and you change the person and it's all tribal knowledge that isn't documented as a system, they're going to actually get similar but different products. If you go with the aviation analogy, you're going to get jet fuel instead of 110 low lead. Those are actually 2 completely different fuels. You don't switch those, but it's still fuel, right? So as we crossed, the 5-6 person mark in terms of total headcount, we realized we needed to focus on, what are the work products that we're going to be producing? How do we produce them? and how do we document the production of these? And as you mentioned earlier, it's a little squishy for us because we are doing a lot of creative work, right? You don't want to systematize or train or standard operating procedure out all of the creative ideas that we're producing for our clients. That being said, we still needed to produce a product that was consistent or a service that was consistent. And so that's when we started to focus on systems around project management, onboarding clients, onboarding team members. So everyone had the same experience, joining our agency as the other person did there. And that was really the beginning of us putting systems and SOPs or standard operating procedures into the business at about the 5 or 6 person mark.
Great. So from what I'm hearing, it's basically you decided to do that because you wanted to achieve consistency, right? Mm-hmm. So consistency internally in terms of the operations. So everyone does the same way. And the output, you can control the output, right? So you basically have a similar output no matter who is the person who is in charge of it. So that would be one reason is consistency. And that leads also to a better customer experience or a client experience because they have that consistency of service. And also for onboarding and training because you were growing your team, right?
Exactly. And the last thing I would mention is, and I'll use a proverb that was just shared with me this week, and I'm paraphrasing, so give me a little bit of grace there. But the proverb goes something like, when an elder person dies, a library burns down. What does that mean, right? All the tribal knowledge in their head. And so while no one has died working at our company, which I'm very grateful for, it would be a little unusual in the marketing business for people to be dying all over our company. While no one has died, what I mean by that proverb is if they leave, if somebody gets sick, which has happened, we've had folks at our company come down with a terminal illness and they were out for extended periods of time. All of that in between their ears was undocumented. They were unable to train anybody else on it. And it left our clients with a really poor customer experience. They were very understanding in those cases, but I knew that they were kind of like, guys, it's up to you to document your stuff so that we get the consistent product and service we're accustomed to. And so it's really important for us if somebody's out either permanently, like they leave the company, or if they're unwell and they're unable to work for an extended period of time.
That's a very good point. I love that proverb, by the way. I'm going to paraphrase it as well. And when you actually find the right one, let me know like what exact wording so we can quote it. But I love it. It's a great proverb and it's so true. So, I was just on a call before we were recording this podcast with one of my clients, and I was interviewing the group, and we were in order to map the processes and start documenting, right? And I could see the apprehension in some of the employees because they realized that, if they are going to give that knowledge, they might be dispensable. They might not be needed, right? And I try to assure them, no, this is not the whole idea here. And one of them said, yeah, if I all of a sudden get hit by a bus, which I don't like that saying necessarily, but I said, what about if you take a 2-week vacation with nobody bothers you and everybody starts laughing because apparently nobody can take that vacation because they can be, there is no cross training. That's what we're doing the project. So what, from your experience, what does it take to actually get the entire team on board to actually document those processes and procedures?
Well, it's not easy. We've made multiple attempts at it over the past decade or past 11 years. And what I have found to be helpful recently is being radically honest with the team and saying, we are a small business. This isn't General Electric. We're not Procter & Gamble or Target or, Walmart or some massive organization. We are a small business. What does that mean for you, right? Like, let's get selfish. This is about me. It's about you. What does that mean for you? Well, eventually, you're probably going to want to, advance your career, try new things, manage people. And the item that seems to, the carrot or the incentive that seems to encourage folks to document things the most is, if you want to advance here at this company, you will advance in a couple ways. Number one, you'll either be a service team leader, meaning that you are the head of the entire service line. So quality control for that specific service runs through you. That comes with added responsibility and added compensation. So service line leader. The other way is you can move up vertically through our organization. Again, we don't have a huge, matrixed organization, but we do have opportunities to move vertically. To move vertically, you need to manage people. So if you want to manage people, either them as an individual or their work output, how are you going to evaluate whether it's good or not? Right? It can't be subjective. Like they run every single piece of work by you, because that's not scalable at all. And in fact, it's just a bottleneck that you're creating in the organization. So what is for lack of a better term, the scorecard or the grading criteria of what is good work product and not good? So if you want to advance, that's really the incentive that seems to click with our team, and they understand like, oh, I either need to manage work product and the quality of it as a whole, or I need to manage people. And those are ways that I can make more money, try new things, kind of continue to develop as a professional within the trade and the craft of digital marketing.
That's fantastic. That is kind of like just makes it complete the idea of like, how do you, because that's a question that comes up, like, how do you incentivize, or how do you encourage or inspire? How do you inspire your team to participate in a process documentation project? And it is exactly what you did, is exactly what I do as well. Like, you first of all find out their why, like how would that benefit them, right? And show them and basically illustrate or show the different aspects of how it's going to help. It will help to manage people better. It will help to manage their own process better. It will help for them to create a more consistent output, that maybe there will be less overworked, less stress, because there is going to be more consistency. I think it will also, some of them will say, well, it's better teamwork because we will understand what each of us is doing. It will also allow for a legacy. Sometimes I work with companies that you have employees, to your proverb, right? Employees that have been, not that anybody's going to die, but employees that have been there for a long time. And they go, well, I invested 30 years developing this particular way of doing things. So that if it's documented, it's not going to get lost, right? It will also create less friction in the organization because people can collaborate better. So all those reasons can be reasons that are cross-training, people going on vacation, right? So I think it starts with finding out the why for each individual, and also going over the different aspects and the different benefits. And that really how you will get a buy-in from the group to actually participate in this project. So I think those are really well said points. So tell me and ask listeners like a little bit about your level of systematization and processes. What does it look like, and where do you store them? How do you use them?
Yeah. So where we store them has changed many times over the years. I wish that I had a story where it's like, oh, we put them in one place and everyone just went there forever. That's actually not how it worked at all. Originally, we stored them on our file server, Google Drive, and then we have an internal intranet, with different documentation just for internal team members. And so we store them there. That seemed to be a logical place. And when I say them, to be specific, I'm talking about written documentation, like step by step. Like you go here, you click this, number 1, number 2, number 3, very prescriptive. We've discovered that a couple things. Number 1, nobody on our team really used the intranet. Everyone kept saying, where is this again? What's going, how do I find this? So the central repository was failing because nobody really liked to use the internet. It was clunky. It wasn't very user friendly. It was a little bit difficult to use at times, especially with a lot of process and system documentation there. So what we ended up doing is a couple things. We're moving it off the intranet and into our project management system for the key purpose of anybody who's new that joins instead of having to take something from the intranet and then get a project task assigned to them outside of the intranet and then bring those two things together, it's all right there, right? It says, hey, Mike, go do this thing. And oh, by the way, it's actually listed exactly right here of how we do this thing. And so we templated a lot of those into Asana, which is our project management system. The other thing that we've done in the past year is, and this took a little bit of time to catch on, we encouraged everyone and eventually required everyone to not only write the process or the system, but to record it using a tool like Loom. And at first there was, people wanted to do it perfectly. Like, why would I show a training where I make a mistake? But actually we leaned into that and we said, no, that's good. If you are making a mistake while you're recording, keep it. Because if you made that mistake and you do this work all the time, guess what? The person who is being cross-trained or onboarded, who's never done this work before, they're probably going to click the same button the wrong way. And so I can even, attest myself, it was really awkward to record training videos or systems where I was making mistakes. And it took me a while to get over it. And eventually I would just say, oh, that is a mistake. Don't do that. I right-clicked over on here. You actually need to left-click over there to, open this program or whatever the scenario might be. And so we found that with the videos, the feedback we've gotten over the past year or so, maybe 18 months, has been, it's really nice to hear somebody. It's nice to read it. And it's nice to see it, right? So you're engaging more senses. And there's also a sense of, and this is, I should be clear, this is an opinion of mine. I haven't quite heard these words verbatim yet. There's a sense of, if this person who's a subject matter expert at whatever this system is producing makes a mistake, it's okay for me to make mistakes too. And that's not encouraging people to run around making mistakes. It's just taking some of that burden off of their shoulders. Like, it's okay. Like, even the expert who recorded this system and then created, codified it in writing and over Loom for video and audio, even they make mistakes too doing this. So don't worry about trying to be perfect. It's more about progress over perfection. Yesterday you couldn't do this at all. Today you can actually run this system to some degree of excellence. And it might not be perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be codified so that you can actually pick this up and execute on the system or the SOP so that your colleague can go to Italy for a 4-week vacation because they deserve it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, great. And I'm with you on that. I mean, we document by videoing. Obviously I do Zoom calls like this one and I record it. And then from there we extract minutes from the video to show how it's being done. That's how we document. And it's very important to use all the methods of learning. Some people are more visual. Some people want to hear. Some people want to actually have the documents there so they can touch and do. Some people just want to, and as I said, read the instructions. So it's definitely, it's spot on using all the methodology, right? And what you describe in terms of like the processes being here and being there and then centralizing them, that's why I'm a big promoter of process documentation platforms, because that way it's all there on the cloud. It has its version controlled, it's easy access, etc. So definitely having it in a centralized location is super important.
Yeah.
So now, Mike, the question that we were talking about in terms of like, how do you know what to document? I mean, do we have to document everything? What level of documentation do we have to go into? There are different schools. There are different schools of thoughts, right? In terms of, you just do the core processes, just like the main, basically high level steps. And then there can be one that says, well, you have to document everything and you need to know every single aspect, which, my answer to this depends on your industry. As we were talking about flying, yeah, you will have to document a lot and much more specific. And I work with many engineering companies where you have to have very rigorous quality control procedures, rigorous quality control procedures. Well, you better document a lot with a lot of detail, right? But still, there are some processes that you need to go into detail more details than others, and some of them don't, right? And you have to also leave the freedom for creativity. And that's why you hire good people and the right people so they can create. So what is it like from your experience? And also, what do you run into in terms of the decision of when do we actually need a system and when we don't?
Yeah, there's usually a few kind of like flags that go up for when we need a system. First one is this a task that gets repeated regularly? I would argue that annual is not very regular. It's like every 12 months. Does this happen daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly? Okay, that probably needs to be documented and turned into a system or an SOP. Another place is this a system that we will eventually be training somebody else on, like with the intention of training someone else, meaning maybe one of our directors creates a system that they have the intention of training a subject matter expert or even a specialist, which is one of our more entry level roles here at MKG, that they have the full intention of training somebody else to help with. The other thing, that it's kind of like a flag that goes up for, yes, we need a system, is who needs to be on a regular basis executing the system. And the example I'd give there is here at MKG, we have a virtual assistant, and she does a lot of work for us. And she's very process and systems oriented because she works 12 hours different from us, right? Our days are completely flipped. So we have a little bit of overlap, but not a lot. And we have to think, is this something that one of our directors is going to do? Or is this a task that, yes, it needs to get done? The director doesn't need to do this. In fact, the VA could be doing this. And so that's usually the other light bulb that goes off when we say, could Michelle be working on this? And if the answer is yes, we tend to work backwards and say, well, tell me why she shouldn't be working on it. And if nobody can come up with a compelling argument, we open it for debate, but no one has a compelling argument. It's, well, okay, Michelle's now going to do this system. It's now hers to own. And we're going to build a system and process documentation to go along with that. But it comes down to the phrase we use there is the return on time. Are we going to get the return on time for us running the system? Are our clients going to get some sort of extra return on time if we do it? Or is this something that a VA could work on, and the work product is just as good because it's clear, there's a clear outcome that the system drives towards producing. So those are three places that stand out for us that kind of shoot light bulbs off and make us wonder, do we need a system here? And if one of those three criteria pop up, we usually say, yeah, it sounds like we need a system or an SOP.
I like it. Also on the first one that you mentioned in terms of like a repetitive task, in terms of the annual one, so I would say to that, there is no point, like, let's say if you're doing something annually and the next one you're going to do it is in June, let's say, or July, let's say you have to close the book. So you have to close the year financially or whatnot. I mean, It's good to document it because if it's being done annually, you're probably going to forget year to year, or it's going to be less intuitive.
That's
but
right.
What I would say to that is, to your point, I would not, if right now I'm sitting and documenting, I would not do it now. I would wait until you actually do it and then record a video and then have it and then write a procedure off of that. So when next year comes, you will have the return on time, because instead of teaching yourself again for 2 hours, how did I do it before? Where is it? Where's the file? What did I do? You just pull up the instructions, boom, 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 and then you just do it. Mm-hmm. But that is like, I would suggest doing it while you're doing it and not ahead of time. So just to clarify that. But I love those 3 points. So what do you think is a little bit of a question mark or a doubt whether a system is needed or not? What can we over systematize?
Yeah, I'd come back to the third example I gave around the return on time. I'm just going to flip that on its head. If the return on time isn't really there, and that's a little bit of a vague statement. What I mean by that is, if it takes more time to maintain the system and keep it up to date on a regular SOP or something that could be a system, that's when I start to question, are we over engineering this? This seems to be changing all the time. Actually, the example you just gave, like, once a year we do these annual returns. And now because of COVID, we're all blessed with employees in a bunch of different states when we used to be a little bit more, clustered. And so that's a great example of thinking about like state tax return systems as a founder or a business owner. Sometimes they stay the same and sometimes they change. Like I can tell you right now, the state of New Jersey keeps changing all these different URLs you're supposed to go to file, tax information at the end of the year. And it's been a pain for us. And so it seems like the system never quite delivers a return on time because we always end up sending in a customer support email asking how do I give you money?
Right.
And they come back and say, oh yeah, we changed that. And of course, they probably sent us something in the mail notifying us. For whatever reason, we didn't see it. And so that would be one area where I would argue, like, if that system is not delivering a good return on time, if it's kind of like wagging your tail instead of the other way around, I would argue that that's a hard investment to continue making.
Mm-hmm. It's true. That's true. Do you ever think that, do you ever buy into an employee telling you, well, we don't need a system here because I do it differently every single time, so we can't really systematize it?
So I've heard that before. And the way I have responded has been to just be very curious. And so I call it my 5-year-old hat. So I'm going to be a 5-year-old and I'm going to ask versions of why. Oh, okay. Tell me more. Why do you do it differently every time? Does it work better one way or another? Do different clients expect it one way? Maybe there's some client specific nuances, right, that I'm not aware of. And when I get curious like that, there's been a handful of cases where we have some systems that are like, we have got a few invoicing procedures for certain clients that are very unique to them. Like we'll probably never see some of these requirements again. But most of the time when I hear the phrase that you just mentioned, I'm like, well, I do it different every time. So, I don't need the system. Usually when I get curious and ask more, and when we dive in collectively as a team, we realize, okay, there is a little bit of nuance there, but ultimately in the example I just gave, you're sending an invoice. It's the same outcome, right? It needs to go from us to them so that we get paid. So if we can at least produce a system that takes 60% of that, into a system, 70% into a system, and still leaves a little bit of room for creativity or ambiguity, some creative license, that 70% is actually really helpful. And the phrase that I was taught years ago was this phrase called energy vampires. And so we used to ask our team members, what takes you, do it like once a year. What's something that absolutely zaps your energy? Like when you start doing this thing, like you feel down, and, you're just like, oh man, it's not a charge up. It's like a shut down type thing. And what we did is we would translate energy vampires into time. So we would hear, they'd say, this, that, and the other. Okay. How much time do you think those 3 things occupy in any given month, for example? Well, it's not that much time. It's maybe like 5 hours a month. Okay, well, there's 12 months in a year. So what you're saying is there's 60 hours in a month that you struggle with something. It's a total energy vampire. It sucks all of your good mojo, leaves you, wanting to take a nap. And if we could create a system that would handle at least 50% of that, you would only have to do that for 30 hours. So you actually kind of make it very real to them. Like, oh, half the time. If we could make a system that got you 75% of the way there, and again, left 25% for creative license and, some of your own thinking. We're not trying to stamp that out of you. This isn't a standardized test. That's not our business. 75%, that's 45 hours that just magically evaporates. That's a whole work week that evaporates of that painful stuff that drains your energy. And when you look at that at scale, we're just under 20 people, using a round number of saving, 20 people and 45 hours a year. That's a lot of time. Like, before you know it, you've gone from just a week to many weeks worth of time, 20 weeks worth of time that have just been opened up for you. And so oftentimes when it's framed that way, they tend to start saying, like, okay, well, maybe this system thing could work, and here's how it could work. There are instances, and I'd love to hear your experience as well. There are instances where folks aren't really that interested, and they just are never interested. But we try and make it real to them, right? This is not just me saying we need to systematize the business. It's me making it real for you in your day-to-day business.
100%. 100%. That's my experience, is always get the buy-in from the stakeholders, right? I mean, what is it there for them? How it is actually going to help them? And I love all the common thread that we actually had throughout the conversation, which is return on time. You are basically, by systematizing, you are bringing back time, which of course will then translate to profitability and money, et cetera, servicing more clients, servicing them better, they come back, et cetera. But it's the return on time, and getting that buy-in from your group of why systematizing, right? Getting the agreement that systematizing will get them more time, and also other benefits, like, as you said, like promotion, being able to cross-train, being able to leave the legacy behind, all of those things, right? But it is really the buy-in, getting that buy-in and explanation, and asking the questions, and arriving at your own personal why of why is it important to document processes and procedures.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that return on time comment tends to kind of flip a switch with people. They tend to start to think, like, oh, well, I'm going to spend this time at work anyways. I'd much rather be doing something I enjoy, and let these vampires, like, how can I minimize these vampires over here?
Right.
So the how becomes, there is a way. It's called building systems and SOPs, and then actually putting those systems and SOPs into the wild, into the business, and actually running them and seeing what happens, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what are some of your successful actions in terms of getting those SOPs followed by all?
So a couple things. In terms of following the SOPs, because they are plugged into our project management system, into Asana, they're a little bit hard to ignore, because as you're reading the thing you're supposed to be doing, you're literally reading the whole process. And then there's a Loom video that you can watch and listen to. And so that centralization, we talked about that earlier, right? How do I make this so I don't have to go here, there, and then back to the middle to make this thing work? It's all centralized. So it's kind of like our company values, like they're ingrained in your day-to-day work. And that's been a really helpful way. It seems simple. I'm embarrassed to say it took us about 10 years to figure that out. Maybe other business owners are faster than we are, but it took us a while to think of, they got to be centralized, and they have to be in your day-to-day work and your tasks. The other way is, and you talked about this earlier, cross-training or just training in general. We've found that our systems get adopted the more that they get used. So when are great, examples of them being used? When we're hiring either new people or junior people who are needing to be trained up, right? So they're coming in with total beginner's mind, right? And not total, but total beginner's mind to our system, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all foreign, it's all new to them. So having to actually walk through as an individual contributor or a director in our company and train somebody through the system not only lets you experience it when you're doing the SOP, when you're executing it yourself, but now you're actually training it to somebody else. And that has been really helpful. We brought on two new members to the team this summer, and they've been spending the past few months just being trained by the team, right? Working through our SOPs, working through our systems, trying to understand when they do have some creative license, when that's what the documentation says, versus when the documentation says, this is the way to do it here. Like we're just going to do it this way at this step of the system. So I would argue that having those opportunities to train people on the systems, and I don't mean train from, say you create, Mike, the head of training at MKG Marketing. That's not really what I mean. I mean more like in the trenches, doing hand-to-hand combat and actually working through the process and training somebody seems to really help everyone, first of all, remember the systems, and second of all, give feedback, right? Because at our company, we don't have a dedicated person who's the director of systems maintenance. It doesn't exist at our company. It's a little bit of a by committee exercise. So if we have people training on those, they'll notice like, oh my gosh, totally forgot. Step 14, totally unnecessary. Like we got to wipe this out of the process documentation. It totally forgot that happened.
Absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. So it's the involvement. You basically keep them alive because you have them alive as part of your project management software. You keep them alive when you're training, and you keep it alive by reviewing and looking. And I had a previous guest where you talk about the continual improvement loop, right? And so it's kind of like when you finish a project, you go back and you look at against your processes to see what worked and what didn't work, right? And it is the revision and the looking at and keeping it alive and referring to it. Do you find yourself solving issues by referring to the processes and procedures?
So are you referring to issues within the system or?
No, issues in the company. Let's say, within the system, but also within the company. So let's say something happened, I don't know, the project didn't turn out, only 99.9% fine, but not that little 0.0001% that didn't go as expected. When you process those issues, do you refer back to the processes to see what worked and what didn't work?
Oh, yes. If it's been a bit of a drum that we beat, and by we, I mean myself, my co-founder, some of our other directors. If a SOP or a system exists, usually when we go back to do a retrospective, discussion on it, when we do a retro, we'll actually bring that up first. So each person presents it a little bit of a different way, but generally it's, let me share my screen. Let's actually look at what we wrote that we're supposed to do. Okay, did we miss any of these steps? That's an easy one. Like, did we just outright miss a step in the system or the process? If so, great. The fix is just don't miss a step anymore.
Correct.
It's there for a reason. And now we had, less than a 100% outcome. So do everything in the system. If we did everything in the process and it still didn't really shake out the way we wanted it to, it was 99.9%, but not 100. Then we look at, okay, where did the system break down? Right. And going back to talking about engineering and systems in an airplane, it's just like, looking at your instruments on your panel, and all of a sudden you lose, let's say you lose your vacuum pump. There's no button that says your vacuum pump is gone on a single engine airplane, but you'll start to lose certain instruments, and there's two that are actually paired together. So when those are all wonky and everything else looks not good, you can realize, oh, I've got a vacuum system problem. I don't have an electrical problem. I don't have a power problem. I don't have a fuel problem. I've got a vacuum problem. So it helps you kind of zero in on where did this break down? And is there anything that we need to change here?
Absolutely. That's great advice. Great. Well, Mike, it's been great talking to you. Such great information and a great example of how you actually brought all those principles to life by implementing them and creating a successful business. So if people want to find out about you, where should they go? About you and the company, of course.
Absolutely. Yeah, we are one and the same, as you know, as a founder of the business. So my name is Mike Krass. That's with a K like karate. And I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can just look me up, Mike Krass. You can also go to our website to learn about some of the marketing programs that we execute for cybersecurity businesses. That website is mkg.marketing. So mkg.marketing, very easy to remember. It'll take you right to us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for being a guest on this podcast.
Absolutely. I'm honored to be here. And my last words of advice would be, don't stop trying to build systems that will help your business and your team be more productive. It took us, like I said, over a decade to really get systems going. It took a long time to get buy-in. And I would just encourage all the listeners that as we experienced, you will experience a lot of letdowns, a lot of systems that don't work, a lot of failure, a lot of, like the African proverb I mentioned, a lot of libraries burning down. It's worth it to keep going. And I would encourage you to keep going if you're committed to scaling your business.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.